Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our SQL 2012 licensing changes and the new features of SQL 2014 webinar. So today we will be joined by Fabienne Pourquet from Bytes Software Services and Richard Harthill and Neil Hambley from Northdoor.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everybody for joining today. So I'll just give you a little bit of background as to who Northdoor are before I hand you over to Neil Hambley. So Northdoor partner with Bytes, Microsoft, and also with a number of other partners. And we're an IT consultancy that specialises in data and the data lifecycle. We've been trading for about 27 years. We're based in London. We provide consultancy services, implementation services, and managed support services. And we have a number of practices within our organisation that cover that data lifecycle, that include storage and systems, security, SQL and business intelligence, big data and analytics, SharePoint, application development, and cloud. And we've engaged with a number of Bytes customers over the last 3 years in terms of helping them to provide consultancy around data platform modernizations, health checks, troubleshooting, and other things as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you now.
So good morning everyone, and my name, as Richard said, is Neil Hambley. I'm the SQL Server Apprentice Lead here at Northdoor, and today we're going to be covering the platform modernization session, and we're going to have a focus on a couple of bits. One of those is the engine of a support for 2005, and I'm just going to kind of take you through the agenda that we're going to cover during the session today. So first off, I'm going to be talking about why to modernize your SQL Server estate. We will talk about SQL Server 2005 end of support. Talk about the business benefits that come from modernizing that estate. We're going to focus then in on SQL 2014, which is the most current version of SQL Server. And I'm also going to show you a Power BI modernization report, which is a report based on a maps output of an estate that is actually undergoing a modernization. This is a free report also I'll talk about a little bit later on that you can actually get after this session. We're then going to cover off the licensing. I'm going to pass over then the reins to Bytes to actually kind of take through the licensing areas, and I'm going to cover the basics and then also talk about virtualization, and then we're going to kind of bring it all together and talk about the Power BI report that we can get for you. We're going to then kind of cover off the services that both Northdoor and Bytes have, and then have a Q&A session to finish off. So let's get started with the first section, why modernize. So as I said earlier, SQL Server 2005 is at the end of a kind of its support life cycle. So in April the 12th of 2016, it will actually, in 5 months' time now, it will actually no longer be a supported product by Microsoft. So we have, just less than 5 months now to kind of achieve maybe a migration strategy for any 2005 instances that you currently have within your environment, to make sure that you're able to kind of continue with some level of support from Microsoft. So as you may be aware, it kind of runs on a 10-year cycle. The first 5 years are in mainstream support, and everything then from hot fixes, security updates, and actually complementary support by actually contacting Microsoft itself is fully paid for, and kind of, you're able to kind of make those contacts and figure out any problems and get resolutions to those. It then moves into a 5-year extended support phase where you can't make any changes to the features design. There are some non-security hotfixes that don't get done, and then effectively you have to pay for potentially support if you actually want to have a hotfix developed for your kind of product at that time. And then after that, it's purely a kind of self-help kind of strategy for that. So unless you have a large amount of money, Microsoft do actually offer that, but it's usually kind of more cost effective to move to a new version that is in the supported framework. And just to kind of reiterate the time frames and the dates for these, April the 12th is 2016 is when we end support for 2005. So I'll just show you kind of that on the screen there. And we also noticed that 2008 and 2008 R2, July of 8th last year, we moved into the kind of extended support. We actually ended mainstream support. But there's also, if you look on the screen there, there's also another date that's going to be coming up fairly soon, in about 20 months' time, which is the end of mainstream support for 2012. So that's now ending its 5-year cycle, and it's going to be moving into that extended support 5-year cycle for that point. There's more information about that at support.microsoft.com lifecycle of all the dates, etc. This gives you a bit of a heads up as to what those dates are. So what really do we mean by end of support? Well, we mean there's no security updates, so there's no more hot fixes, no more security fixes, and the product actually isn't kind of being tested any further at that point because it's no longer maintained or supported by Microsoft at that point. So that means overall you will end up with probably higher maintenance costs. As products get older, they generally usually encounter more types of problems, and performance tends to kind of drop off compared to the newer versions. But also you might have some compliance concerns. So if you actually have regulatory standards and other compliance risks that you need to kind of comply with, these may not be possible under unsupported products. So that's something also you may need to take into concern. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the business benefits of actually undertaking a modernization project. So we'll start the journey and kind of first off talk about what we can do and why there's that. So looking at the kind of the middles of the screen here, you'll see that kind of arrow. So one of the first things we might want to be kind of concerned with or actually want to take advantage of is faster business processing. We're doing certain things today and it may take like 3 or 4 hours maybe to process that overnight batch. But as you maybe get more and more data, that time frame gets longer and longer, and maybe you need to achieve this in a 1 hour time frame or even less time. So what we're trying to do here is figuring out, can we, with the newer versions of SQL Server, actually reduce the processing time and actually get more processing done in the same time frames? Because that's the one thing that we can't change, is the amount of time we have available. We're probably also maybe looking to possibly reduce the lower kind of total cost of ownership of running that estate. So how much money do we spend to maintain that platform and actually run our business on that data platform? We may want to kind of figure out how to do that for a lower cost. Now, we also want a short return on investment for any work we do that does that. So we're going to be covering that off a little bit later in the session. This is the kind of middle section, the enhancing functionality. This is one where we normally also kind of find that we need those enhanced capabilities that we don't have today. We need to be able to do those analytics. We need to be able to kind of get insight into our data much better than we were able to do with the earlier versions of, say, 2005 or 2008 SQL. Security is one that we also, every business needs to be taken care of. There's better capabilities around the whole security of the database. We often see those kind of news articles saying a breach here, and lots of data has been kind of made available for business users and their contact details. That's not something your business wants. A lot of companies have actually gone out of business because of that. So we want to ensure that you have the best security you need in order to achieve that. And that's not only just kind of exposure out to the wider audience of the world, but also making sure the right people inside your business have access to what they need, and those that don't need access can't actually get that level of information that they shouldn't be seeing. And finally, one of the ones that we're seeing over and over being asked is, I need to utilize my resources much better. I need to have better density of utilization. I need to have it on a smaller footprint of servers. So we want to increase that resource utilization. So the questions we now kind of bring around that are, what kind of important data features are for yourself, for your business? That's going to change from business to business. How well is your current platform even meeting those business requirements? Because that's probably changed over the last few years, and you may need to do more with your data and actually get more insight and figure out how to drive better value from the data you hold. You may also be kind of using some business critical features at the moment, so maybe mirroring or some other kind of DR strategy. Well, can we do things better, and what are those features we're using, and is there better ways, more effective ways of doing that? And as we touched on earlier, compliance may also be one of the key reasons for modernization. So again, if you have any questions as we go through, please put those into the kind of question window, and we can kind of tackle those as we go through this session and at the end. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the journey itself. So modernization generally kind of involves a number of kind of key phases. One of the first phases, we actually want to increase productivity. We want to increase that kind of infrastructure return on investment. We have this, we maybe want to have a smaller estate, less servers in the data center, that kind of thing. But also we may have stricter and higher SLAs that we want to achieve. We maybe want to kind of actually get to the point where we can do that response back to the customer in less than a couple of seconds, as opposed to maybe 30 seconds that it might be today. Consolidation is often one that we are looking at when we do these modernization projects. You know, can I consolidate 2 or 3 or more workloads onto a single instance? So how do I achieve that? How can I reduce the complexity of my system, make things simpler to manage and the management of that overhead? Again, we kind of talked about service levels. I want to be able to do things in a faster time frame, and I need to have kind of stricter, higher performant SLAs. You know, I want those 3 or 4 nines, whereas previously I wasn't maybe able to achieve that. Possibly I may need to deploy in minutes and hours, possibly instead of days or weeks previously when we looked at kind of doing things. So having a simpler, more consolidated estate means less management, less patching, less requirement to actually deliver kind of those services out to their clients. And finally, kind of being able to do, unleash the potential of your system. So self-service kind of capabilities of maybe business intelligence, getting those cost efficiencies kind of much higher, and the agility of moving that data around your system so that the right people have the right data at the right time and able to achieve all that kind of capabilities that come from that. So we're going to talk now a little bit about the kind of the flagship product, which is SQL Server 2014, and we're going to kind of talk about 2 of the main additions. There is a third one called Business Intelligence, but we're going to kind of first off talk about the evolution of the data platform. So looking back into SQL 2000, right at the top left of your screen there, kind of tagged as the modern database platform, and we brought in XML and KPIs as capabilities that didn't exist before in the SQL Server 7 version. Moving on from there, we kind of brought out the SQL 2005, so there was a 5-year time gap between those releases. But we had a brand new kind of management product called Management Studio, and we brought in a new DR strategy for mirroring. So that's actually taking a copy of your database and actually mirroring it over to another environment for DR purposes. But you weren't able to connect to that and really use that. It was just kind of, in the case of DR, you were able to kind of get back up and running in a much shorter time frame. Performance and productivity was then increased when we looked at SQL Server 2008. So we brought in one of the key kind of capabilities that was lacking was compression. So we were able to take the data set that we had and make it a much smaller data set, so we'd actually be able to get more data in memory and have a smaller footprint on the actual storage itself. We also wanted better capabilities around management and make things more compliant across our estate. So we had policy-based management, allowed us to kind of apply policies and standardize our implementations, etc. And there's a whole raft of different programmability kind of enhancements to the T-SQL language itself that came in. So we were able to do things a lot better with some of the windows and functions that we had around that. The SQL Server 2008 R2 was effectively a kind of mid-release, which is a self-service BI kind of release. So we brought in a whole bunch of new capabilities from the Power Pivot in memory. So we started with some of the new Power kind of tooling, and this was effectively Excel with data being brought in a tabular kind of compressed format. So we had to kind of process a lot of data previously we couldn't get into Excel, and actually get some insight from that. We had a tighter integration with SharePoint, and also one of the features I really like, which is being able to kind of standardize and actually do some data quality on these systems with a product feature called Master Data Services. So these kind of all these products from 2000, 2008 R2, we kind of brought in a great deal of new features that allowed us to kind of do more with our data, cleanse it, and have better kind of capabilities. We then kind of moved into the cloud awareness kind of capability of SQL Server. So SQL Server 2012, we had 5 new capabilities effectively, really, if you look at it with cloud, was always on, which is the high availability DR strategy of taking a individual database, or a group of databases in this case, and actually having that as a replica on a different server. So this was able to be also readable on that, so it's known as readable secondaries. We also brought in the first iteration of column store, which is an in-memory, highly compressed capability of actually storing that data in a much better format, and actually be able to process that data effectively using batch processing. So this was a great capability that for data warehousing. It was kind of write once, read only, so for overnight data loads into data warehousing, this was a strategy that would work very well. We also then kind of complemented the master data services that we had in 2008 R2 with the kind of data quality components of that, so data quality services. This allowed us to start looking at, duplicates we might have in our data sets, any inaccuracies in terms of spelling, and figuring out how to kind of put quality of data in. So obviously, if you have quality data in your database, you're going to get quality results out. If you have inaccuracies in your database and you're not using data quality in some respect, you're going to potentially have inaccurate data actually kind of being generated in your reports, etc. Power View was another one of the Power capabilities that we brought in. So this allowed us to kind of view that data in a few different ways. And again, we were starting to kind of enhance the visualization of data throughout that. But I think one of the key ones here was the tight integration with the cloud Azure, in this case, capabilities, being able to back up to that data to the environment, being able to start moving that data in between on-premises and cloud technologies. And we started to do that directly within the product very effectively. Then we're going to move on to kind of the mission critical and cloud performance kind of capabilities of SQL Server 2014. So we also brought in a new product called in-memory OLTP. So this is effectively in-memory both across data warehousing and OLTP. OLTP is online transactional processing. So this is your traditional small data inserts, updates, deletes. And we're able to kind of do that in a lock-in and latch-free capability. So we're able to kind of really kind of push through the performance in kind of maybe 30 times what it was able to be done before, because we have these new structures that are kept a in-memory version of that data set. And we also could bring that along with the schema as well. There was a massive amount of new changes to performance and scalability. So this is both for virtualization and other capabilities. So we do a lot more with the product. In fact, actually, there's some benchmarking been done. 2014 is been tagged at 13 times more performant than the SQL 2005 environment. So if you think about that, 13 of your SQL 2005 environments, the workloads on that effectively would be able to fit onto a single 2014 system. We're also now to really kind of have a hybrid cloud environment, and optimize that with kind of, backing up to the URL, into the Azure cloud, being able to restore DR strategies, and a whole bunch of capabilities of managing your cloud and your on-premise systems within one environment, within a single shot, effectively. We had other systems like HD Insight to be able to kind of start looking at the kind of large data sets and how we process those. So this is the kind of Hadoop offering that came through from that. And we had the cloud BI. We were able to do BI effectively directly into the cloud as well. And these are kind of some of the kind of components that have been added over that time. You'll see in a few slides later on, I've got a kind of whole list of things that have come through from 2014, from 2005 rather, to 2014. And it's such a big list, you'll be able to kind of see what's able to be done now that we weren't able to do in 2005. So just to kind of finish off on the performance and functionality, this is a kind of a quick kind of step through the years of different releases, and kind of just explaining the evolution of SQL. And you can see here that the Forrester report has been kind of tracking how things have been doing over those years, and it's a different product now. And if we focus on the very last one, the SQL 2014 vertical there, you see up to 30 times faster transactions, up to 100 times query performance gains. This is something that we wouldn't have been able to conceive of, say kind of 8 or 9 years ago, when SQL 2005 was kind of getting a foothold into the industry. But now we have a completely different set of technologies that have been driven through from research and kind of innovations that come through. So, today, 2014 gives us a completely different landscape for what SQL Server and database platform is able to deliver for us. So let's kind of talk about optimizing your data platform with maybe looking at 2014. So as we talked about earlier, virtualizing and consolidating your workloads, scaling up and scaling out even through private cloud, and using a lower cost of ownership of managing all of that. This also includes looking at the Windows Server versions that we actually run on. So Windows Server 2012 R2, capable with 2014 deployed onto it, has a lot of capabilities than maybe a Windows Server 2005, sorry, SQL Server 2005 and Windows Server 2003. Both for 2003 is also end of support already, early this year. We have the hybrid cloud solutions. We can actually kind of now decide where we need to put our workloads that are more applicable for the performance that we need, scalability. Maybe you have those month-end runs you need to scale out. That's something that's easy to achieve by actually moving some of those workloads up into the cloud, scaling it out, and then scaling it back down again when we need to. We can transition those workloads between on-premises and cloud very simply now by actually running some tooling that will actually allow us to deploy very quickly to the cloud. And we have a single kind of set of tooling and programming models that we can utilize for that as well. So some of the kind of things that we might want to be considering is to lower that cost of ownership. So we want to kind of go higher up into the screen here towards maybe the hybrid cloud. Often we're finding that people at the moment are less on physical, the bottom left. That's kind of not very common now as it used to be. Virtualization on premises and appliance and private clouds that you run in your own data centers are very common and are kind of probably the mainstream of where we see most of the instances deployed today. Infrastructure as a service, which is effectively the VM is managed by Microsoft itself in one of the Azure data centers, and you are then installing SQL Server in there, managing that, managing the patching and everything else that comes with that. But effectively the VM is no longer in your own data center, it's in a managed center by Microsoft and the Azure capability. And finally, we have the kind of newer one on the block, which is the platform as a service and service as a service. We're talking really about SQL database here and having a single database or multiple databases that we might want to manage as a group and have administration across that. But we're not really really wanting to look at the VM or the Windows infrastructure anymore. We just want to get the database, and that's the thing that we're looking for. And maybe databases that are kind of in the 250 gig or even the 500 gigabyte now and 1 terabyte for the very largest one, we can actually kind of consider moving those potentially to a platform as a service. So we may want to reduce total cost of ownership, increase availability, so Azure VMs have multiple kind of copies of this built in, so we don't need to have that high availability because it's inherent in time what we do with Azure. We want to maybe virtualize and consolidate the Windows Server infrastructure and move and actually spin up these capabilities in minutes rather than weeks. We're buying hardware and going through that process. And effectively, we may want to have capability of rolling that out to multiple regions and have localized kind of data sets for that region rather than having a central one base where maybe latency for some customers is not as good as it needs to be. So the benefits of upgrading SQL Server 2014. So as we said earlier, maybe getting that faster transaction capability, the 100 times query performance gains with the in-memory technologies. Possibly you might need to get better kind of DR and HA capability, so you might want some higher 9 kind of capabilities, some 999s or 49s. Scaling up your Windows and kind of virtualization. So Windows Server 2012 R2 can scale up to 640 logical processors and multiple terabytes of RAM. This is something maybe for some of the very large data sets is actually going to give you a great degree of consolidation and a lower cost of ownership by doing that. Security is one that we probably all need to pay more attention to, getting that supportable capability. So we need to be on mainstream supported products like 2012, 2014. And we need those capabilities to be able to do that compliance audits. And that is much more enhanced in later versions of SQL Server. Possibly that it's a less risky, vulnerable database platform than some of the other platforms out there. And that's been seen for 5 or 6 years in a row that we have the kind of lowest amount of potential for security breaches there. Maximizing your data infrastructure by those virtualization and consolidation capabilities, using hybrid cloud and kind of maybe mixing your applications with SQL Azure is sort of also the potentially, you need to figure out, is that something that's going to be of a cost benefit to yourselves? Does it give you the capabilities of where you need to be today? And how do we kind of move forward? So a quick kind of feature comparison for you, just to kind of give you a heads up as to the difference between actually even 2005 is no longer on this slide, but from 2008 and 2012, you can see that there's kind of some of the capabilities that don't exist. Backup encryption support, enhanced separation of duties, being able to get better buffer pool extension to SSDs, and some of the new capabilities like in-memory OLTP. So, you really probably want to be considering what you need to have in your environment capability-wise, and whether these features are available in the release that you're currently working with, or whether a next release is something to consider. So I'm just going to quickly cover off before we move on to kind of the licensing piece. So I'm going to cover off the standard edition. And I'm not going to spend much time on this because we are short on time today. But, standard edition is kind of your entry level for kind of the version that you want to be looking at. It's a business class data management system, so it's been out for a long time. It has great capabilities. You can actually kind of then move some of that data in between the cloud and also kind of get insights. So it has some reporting capabilities and analytics directly into that product itself. So here's a quick kind of screenshot of some of the things around performance, availability, and security. I'm not going to talk you through all of it here, but basically, one of the things that we were able to do is standard edition moved to a higher memory allocation of 128 gig. So 2012 only allowed 64 gigabytes, by the way. So 2014 doubled that. So that's something maybe to consider if you are on standard, is to move to that 2014 version. We have some availability for kind of database mirroring, log shipping. There's kind of the old store of a kind of DR. And we also could brought in the 2-node failover clustering capability. And we can maybe even put that on Windows Server Core, which would reduce the patching capability by as much as 50 to 60% there. Security, there's been some enhanced capabilities, but one of the great ones probably is in enhanced separation of duty. Being able to define the security kind of constraints that specific account that's using it needs to have. So maybe being able to administer the system without seeing some of the critical data that maybe previously they were able to see that shouldn't really be visible to those eyes. And we can kind of get better security there. And if you were looking at Azure, there's also some kind of backup to Azure. We can actually enable automatic backups. There's something called smart backup kind of capabilities built into 2014. And we can actually do kind of instance level restores point in time, measure backup usage patterns, and figure out kind of when that needs to be backed up. So it's kind of only backing up data on a smart basis as opposed to more of a scheduled thing. And then we can even kind of bring that to sharing that out to geographic replication environments and actually restored to VMs in other data regions as well. For Enterprise Edition, I'm going to just give you a quick overhead as well on this one. So this is more the mission critical type systems where you need that full insight. You need maybe a platform that is really hybrid there. And so some examples is that kind of in-memory technology that came in that edition. Being able to kind of leverage that hardware and really kind of force performance out of that. So here's an example of BWin, which we've seen many times in some examples, that it basically was 16 times faster within memory. So if you can kind of take your application today and kind of achieve those similar gains, how would that change your business? And there's some additional things like in-memory BI, Power Pivot, buffer pool extensions. And one of the key ones I think for me is the column store became a clustered version, which meant that we no longer needed the base tables. And we could actually make this around about 1/10 the size of the original data set. So really driving down that data capability, the data size, and actually driving through the capabilities that come with that. Disaster recovery has really been enhanced with being able to use what's called always on as a terminology. This is an FCI, which is a failover cluster instance, but also availability groups. I won't go into the details, but basically this means that we have the ability to have synchronous and asynchronous kind of replicas of our data in different locations. And we can actually start running things like BI workloads effectively off that, running our backups off for a different one, and really kind of starting to drive through the integration with Windows Server 2012 R2 and having all those capabilities that come with that new version. As I said, I'll give you a quick recap of kind of all of the capabilities that are different between 2005 and 2014. So I'll let you kind of visualize the screen a bit. You will have access to this information as well. But it's such a big list that I would need a couple of hours to go through this kind of capability for you. But as you can see, everything from mission critical through to data insights and monetization, we really have a lot of new capabilities to kind of bring to the table with 2014 now. So finally, I'm going to kind of bring up my final slide before I hand over. And this is a quick report I'm going to just demonstrate to you now in Power BI. You may have heard of Power BI. It's kind of a way of visualizing your data more effectively. And here is an example of a modernization kind of company that's going through the same exercise that you may be considering. They have close to 100 instances. I'm just going to switch over to my actual screen where I can bring up the view, and hopefully you'll see this a little bit better on the screen now. So here we have a bit of information that's been visualized around all the different versions of SQL Server that exist in the state, even from 7 through 2000, 2005, the 2008 versions, 2012, etc. I wanted to maybe see how many 2005 instances I have. So I have 23 instances that currently have 111 gigs of RAM across them, and I want to now maybe see how many of those are physical. There's 10 physical and 13 virtual there. So I've got a bit of information about that to clear that screen there. I want to see if there's any clustered instances. Well, there is a 2-node cluster that we have here, and I can see here that this is SQL 2005 and this is an Enterprise Edition one. But if I went back again and looked at the other instances here, I can go, what do we have? Let me just clear the screen here. I want to now look at all the clustered instances. I also have a standard group. So I can start moving through and looking at all this information really well. I can actually drill through as well and actually get a listing of what service packs that are actually being deployed, so service pack 2, and information around that nature there. So I can maybe kind of consider, I don't want those 32-bit instances. Actually, half of the instances here are 32-bit and half are 64. So I can see exactly which ones there are. Maybe I can start filtering on which ones have 2 cores associated with them. So you can see here, it's a great way of visualizing the data. This is the output of a MAPS, which is Microsoft Assessment Planning Toolkit. And we're going to offer you the capability of getting your own report here. So what we're going to say is, if you're interested in getting one of these reports, you can contact the account manager of Bytes for yourself, and we will give you instructions about how to run the data collection, and then that information will pass, we will generate a report, and then come back to you guys and actually walk through the results for that. So I know from the time we have today, I need to kind of move back to my screen. So let me just move over to my PowerPoint again. So let's go back to the slideshow. So kind of looking at the time we have, I'm thinking about kind of dead on where I need to be. I'm going to pass the kind of the rest of the session now back to Bytes, and you can learn about licensing.
Hi, my name is Fabian, and I am going to talk you through the SQL Server licensing. So first what I'm going to talk about is the edition. I'm not going to go through what they do, but how they're actually licensed and how you can buy them. So 3 main editions, as you've seen: the standard, which is licensed Server and Cal, all per core; Business Intelligence, which is only licensed Server and Cal; and the Enterprise Edition, which is only available per core. You then have a couple of Specialized Edition, the web, only available through Service Provider License Agreements, and Parallel Data Warehouse, again very specialized. Then you have 3 more licenses: SQL Server Developer, and that's only used in developer or testing environments, and that's either as part of MSDN subscriptions, or you can buy that as a standalone for about £30 license per user. You then have 2 more editions: Express and Compact. It is free to use and free to download, but obviously will come with some restrictions. So now let's have a look at the licensing basics. So 2-way really of licensing SQL. One which is Server and Cal. So 2 of the editions are available on a Server and Cal licensing model, and they are the Standard and the Business Intelligence editions. And how do we license them? Well, first you need to purchase a server license. So you purchase a server license for every OSC, whether that's virtual or physical. and you need a license for every user or device that accesses those instances, so client access license. The client access licenses will be able to access either of the editions and are available per user or per device. Now they are required even for indirect access of the server. So what do I mean by indirect access? Well, if you look at applications like, for example, CRM or SharePoint, you'll have your user, your device, accessing and feeding data into CRM or SharePoint, and that is then fed into your SQL and back to the user. That is indirect access, and that does require licensing. The next addition you see is the per call licensing. It was previously per processor before 2012, but since the 2012 edition is licensed per call. And how does that work? So first two editions are available, Standard and Enterprise. And the way you'd license this is first you need to count the number of cores in the server. So that would be core per processors if you install that physical, or cores per virtual machine. Now there is a minimum of 4 core per physical processor or 4 core per virtual machine. So if you have a physical processor with 2 cores, for example, you'd still need to purchase 4 cores for that processor. You can also, if you've seen that, multiply it by the core factor, but really all it does is tells us that there is a minimum of 4, unless you have an AMD processor. AMD processors, if you license the physical cores, do come with a discount, and you count the number of cores, time it by 0.75, and that gives you a discounted price for the core licensing. You then, of course, purchase that number of license, and they are sold in multiples of 2, so you always buy 2 core pack licenses. And these cannot be split, so you can't buy a core pack and use it on 2 different servers, for example. Once you license all the cores in environment you install SQL, you don't actually need to purchase any CAL, so it gives you unlimited access for users that are accessing SQL, external users or internal users. So when would you choose to license server and CAL as opposed to core or vice versa? Well, first, if you have a large number of users or a number of users that can't be quantified, you'd license per core because it gives you that unlimited access. If you're using SQL as a backend to an internet workload or anything like that, again, that's unlimited access from external users. You wouldn't be able to assign CALs to those users who purchased the per core model. If you were looking at the Enterprise edition, that's only available per core, so you'd have to license that per core. Same with the BI edition, that's only available server and CAL, so you'd license that server and CAL. Now let's have a look at the virtualization. So when we virtualize SQL on a server and CAL basis, what we do is we count the number of virtual machines on which SQL is installed. So my example here has 4 VMs. 2 of which have SQL installed, so I would purchase 2 server licenses for SQL. So with server and CAL, you license the individual virtual machine with the server license, and of course purchase CALs for user or devices accessing the servers. If you license the core edition, do you actually have more ways of licensing this depending on the edition and depending on the environment that you have. So first what we can do is license the individual virtual machines. So we're going to have a host with 4 VMs, 2 SQL Server installations on 2 VMs, and I have assigned 2 cores to those virtual machines. So again, if you remember earlier, I did say there was a minimum of 4 core per virtual machine. That means that in that case, I would need to buy 4 cores for each of the VMs, so 8 cores in total. And that's available licensing-wise for SQL Server Standard and Enterprise. So again, licensing core edition, you can do that by licensing the virtual processors used by the virtual machine with a minimum of 4 core licenses per virtual machine. What we can do as well is unlimited virtualization. That's only available to the Enterprise edition with software assurance. And what we do in that case is instead of counting the cores assigned to the virtual machines, we count the cores assigned to the actual physical cores in each processors. So if you look at that example here, I have a host with 2 processors, each with 4 cores in them. So I would purchase 8 core licenses of the Enterprise edition with software assurance, and that will allow me to run an unlimited number of VMs of that host. So with the Enterprise Edition with Software Assurance, I can license all the physical cores with Software Assurance with the Enterprise Edition to get unlimited virtualization. The next thing I'm going to talk about is license mobility. So if we look at virtualizing SQL Server, what will tend to happen is you'll have server farming clusters, and you'll have machines going from one host to another for license mobility, for load balancing, failover, etc. So when you license the virtual machines, the actual licenses are always assigned to the host. That means that if I have virtual machines going from one host to another, I would actually need to license every physical host for the maximum number of VMs that can run SQL of those hosts. So that could end up quite expensive. Instead, what we can do is license the virtual machines with Software Assurance, and that allows us to move the virtual machines from one host to another. And what we might want to do as well, as we've talked about earlier, is move our SQL Server to the cloud. So it could be with it could be with the Azure platform, it could be AWS, it could be a service provider. But if you already have licenses with Software Assurance and you want to start moving some of your workload to the cloud, you can do that with Software Assurance. So if you have Software Assurance on core licenses or on server and cloud, you can move that to Azure or service provider. If we look at Azure, for example, and we license that per core, do remember as well that the number of cores assigned to the virtual machine in the cloud must match the number of core licenses you have with Software Assurance. Now the next thing Software Assurance is going to give us as well is the active-passive rights, the failover rights. So if you're using features like Always On, for example, if you have any active-passive environments, if you license that active server with Software Assurance, you actually get one passive instance for every active instance that you license with Software Assurance. So my example here, I have a server with two processors even, each with 6 cores, and so I would need 12 core licenses with Software Assurance, and that second instance, that passive instance, doesn't need to be licensed so long as the SA is active. The core number of the passive instance cannot be higher than what you've actually licensed the active with. Now if you look at another scenario where you have maybe an active passive or an active scenario, you do need to license both. If it's an active scenario, you do need to license both active servers. And if you have an active passive scenario, which is what you see with Always On, you will need to license one of the active and one of the passive, because you only get one passive for each active instance. What you will see with Software Assurance as well is disaster recovery rights. So if you have a DR server which is called, so not turned on unless obviously you have a disaster or in case of testing, you can also use Software Assurance to avoid licensing that server, and that can work if you're doing things like DR in Azure as well.
Okay, so turn my mic back on. Okay, so we're kind of bringing it back all together now, and looking at the time we have left in the webinar. So we're now talking about what your business might need to be considering for the modernization that it's considering. You know, what versions of SQL Server do you already have? Are they going out of support, already out of support potentially if it's 2007? You know, for the 2005, that's obviously just a 5-month window now before we remove the support capability on that. And even 2008 being an extended support, it's currently going to cost you more to kind of maintain that product and kind of run that if you need to invoke support at any time. So we kind of need to now discuss kind of what potentially is available to you. So Northdoor, and I was going to kind of move the slide forward a little bit here, is kind of a consultancy that has a great deal of experience. We are a Microsoft partner. We are gold certified for data platform, cloud, application development, and we also have silver accreditations as well for data analytics and others. Now, we have experience. We are doing this kind of modernization for multiple clients all the time. We do a lot recently with some of the public sector environments where we actually are kind of doing those modernizations. We're finding ways to reduce the licensing costs by getting a more scalable, kind of more utilized environment for them on newer versions of SQL, maybe even moving from standard to enterprise has been capable of being done. So this is kind of where we can bring that expertise. We have myself, who runs the SQL Server kind of practice at Northdoor, and we have a number of other consultants that have a great deal of industry experience within different sectors. So we can kind of bring that to you, but we do a lot of these kind of engagements in collaboration with Bytes, who are licensing kind of specialists in this area. So, you know, we have the experience, we are doing this for a lot of clients, we know the challenges that come through this, and we can able to help you kind of deliver that. Some of these capabilities might be achievable through kind of some of the offerings that you might have as part of your enterprise agreement. So you might have deployment plan services days that are possibly available to you that can help kind of drive through some of the costs of actually evaluating these estates. And this is kind of where we also kind of then obviously have, let me move forward. I think that's the last slide, is it? Yeah, sorry. The kind of Q&A section of this webinar, so we can kind of take any questions that you might have around modernization and or licensing in the final minutes that we have of this session. And also just to remind you that if you're interested in that free report that we spoke about, again, you know, you need to get in contact with your account manager, Bytes account manager, and we can kind of give you the instructions about how to do that. So do we have any questions that have come through from the session?
Yes, so we've had quite a few questions come through, so I'll kick them off with the first one, which asks, is Power BI part of the SQL license?
Power BI isn't part of the SQL license, but you can actually use Power BI for free. So there is a free version of Power BI, which will work with SQL.
Perfect, thank you. And the next question, are there any hypervisors that Microsoft don't recognize in the licensing context?
So I could maybe answer that one. No, so both VMware VMs and also Hyper-V VMs, all of those hypervisor systems are able to be licensed. Effectively, SQL Server runs the service within Windows infrastructure, and effectively we're licensing the service that we're running. So that should hopefully answer that question.
Lovely, thank you. And the next question, which is the core factor multiplier when the server is physical?
So the core factor is actually only used for physical environments. So the core factor will tell you there's a minimum of 4. So if you look at an Intel normal processor, it's a core factor of 2 if you have a dual core processor, core factor of 4 if you have a single core processor, and a core factor of 1 if you have 4 or more processors. If you have an AMD processor, the core factor is 0.75. But if you look at a normal processor, actually, all that the core factor is telling you is that you have to buy at least 4 cores for every physical processor that you have.
Lovely, thank you. And the next question, please could you define passive in the license context?
So Microsoft sees a passive server from licensing perspective as a server that is turned on, running, but not actually accessed.
Lovely. And the next question, how does hyperthreading affect licensing requirements when licensing individual virtual machines?
It doesn't at all. When you license individual virtual machine, oh sorry, it does a little bit, sorry. So when you're licensing individual virtual machine, it's really just a naming convention. So Microsoft will look at how many virtual cores or threads or virtual processor that you're actually assigned to that virtual machine. That's what you're actually licensing. So if you've got 4 threads assigned to that virtual machine, it's basically 4 virtual cores, and that'd be 4 licenses.
Lovely. And the final question here is, what would be the compliance challenges with the SQL Server 2005 going end of life?
Okay, so this is back to me. So the compliance kind of challenges that we generally see is, you know, you really need to be on a supported product in order for compliance really to be signed off today. So you may have certain applications you're running that need to be kind of compliant under certain different kind of agreements, etc., that exist out there and different technologies. invariably, if you're running your platform on a unsupported version, generally you will find that that's not going to kind of meet the criteria for the compliance that you're trying to achieve. And it depends on which one that is, but generally the auditing capabilities are not as kind of verbose as you would have in later versions, but generally it's like it needs to be a supported version. So at the moment 2005 should be considered okay because it's still in the extended support by Microsoft. But as soon as it ends that support, you'll probably find that it would no longer be meeting the criteria for your compliance. This is something we probably need to discuss on an individual basis and look at kind of the specific compliance you're trying to achieve and whether that's actually going to be affected by the product itself. So I'm afraid that's a little bit of a depends question, but we can probably help answer that through a quick conversation on that.
Okay, so we have had one final question come through, which asks, can you buy extra support after extended support from Microsoft?
So the answer is yes, you can, but it's a very expensive operation to do. You'd have to speak to Microsoft specifically about what versions of SQL Server, and to be honest, it's only going to apply to SQL Server 2005 at this point, so you can't buy support for 2000 or earlier versions. You may be trying to buy an extended support effectively for 2005. It's going to be very expensive. We're probably talking, considerable kind of numbers, maybe 6 or 7 figures for that state, and that's only then also going to require an agreement on when you're going to migrate, because Microsoft effectively have ended support, so you're effectively paying for personnel at Microsoft to sit there potentially to help you with those conditions. So something you need to speak to Microsoft about, but pretty much I've seen a couple of governments take out these agreements, but that's pretty much and some large organizations that are in the transition. But you will still need to have a migration strategy in place. So it's not something that you're probably going to be in most people's budgets.
Lovely, thank you. So that's all of the questions that have come through today. Thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you very much to Richard, Neil and Fabienne here for presenting.